December 15th, 1900. A small lighthouse in the middle of the North Atlantic Ocean goes dark. When the relief ship finally arrives at the Flannan Isles, they find the lamp unlit. The beds are unused, the clock has stopped, and the dinner table is set with a meal that is still cold and untouched. But the true horror wasn't in what they found, but in what was written in the logbook. 3 experienced sailors, crying in fear of a storm that, according to every weather station in Scotland, never happened. If the sea was calm, what were they really afraid of? Captain James Harvey was not a man easily frightened. As the master of the lighthouse tender Hesperus, he had navigated the treacherous waters of the Outer Hebrides for years, delivering supplies to the most isolated rocks in Scotland. But this mission was different. It was supposed to be a simple rotation. Drop off relief keeper Joseph Mor, pick up one of the men for shore leave, and deliver Christmas provisions. But the Atlantic had turned violent. For 6 days, a ferocious gale had kept the Hesperus trapped in port at Briascleet, unable to sail. The delay gnawed at the crew. When the storm finally broke on December 26th, Boxing Day, the sea was still heaving with the aftermath of the fury. As the ship cut through the freezing mist and the dark silhouette of the Flannan Isles finally came into view, the atmosphere on board shifted from relief to confusion. Something was wrong. Standard protocol demanded that the lighthouse fly its flag to welcome the relief vessel. The staff was bare. Protocol also dictated that the relief boxes be stacked on the landing grid, ready for loading. The concrete landing was empty. Captain Harvey felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. He reached for the ship's steam whistle and pulled the cord. A shrill, deafening blast echoed against the cliffs, startling the seabirds. But from the lighthouse itself, there was no response. No movement. No figure running down the stairs. Harvey waited, listening to the engine hum and the water lapping against the hull. He blew the whistle again. Silence. He ordered a flare to be fired. It arced through the gray sky, exploding in a brilliant flash. But still, the island remained dead. It was as if the lighthouse had simply ceased to exist. Turning to Joseph Mor, the relief keeper who was anxious to start his shift, Harvey saw his own fear reflected in the man's eyes. "God help them," the captain whispered. "It seems we are visiting a tomb." The silence from the island was unbearable. Someone had to go ashore. Joseph Mor, the relief keeper who knew the 3 men well, volunteered. It was a dangerous transfer. The sea was still violent, splashing heavily against the concrete landing stage. Mor, wrapped in heavy oilskins, timed the swell and jumped from the small boat onto the slippery rocks. He was instantly alone. The Hesperus pulled back to safety, leaving him at the bottom of the towering cliffs. The climb up to the lighthouse was grueling. 160 steep steps carved directly into the rock face. Usually, the keepers would run down to meet the boat. Today, the only sound was Mor's own heavy breathing and the wind screaming around the crags. When he finally reached the summit, the first thing he noticed was the entrance gate to the compound. It was closed. A strange detail, as if the island itself was sealed tight. He walked across the courtyard to the main lighthouse door. It, too, was shut fast. He had to use his own key to unlock it. The heavy oak door creaked open, revealing a dark hallway. Mor shouted the names of his colleagues. "Ducat! Marshall! MacArthur!" His voice just bounced off the cold stone walls. The silence inside was heavier than the storm outside. He moved to the kitchen, the heart of the lighthouse. What he saw there stopped him cold. The fire in the grate was dead ashes. On the table, a meal of meat and potatoes was set for 3 men, but it was stone cold and untouched. One chair was toppled over on the flagstone floor, as if someone had stood up in a sudden, violent panic. He checked the sleeping quarters. The beds were perfectly made, neat and military tight. They hadn't been slept in. On the wall, the large pendulum clock had stopped dead at 9:30. Every clue pointed to a normal evening that was brutally interrupted. But where were they? Mor's eyes turned to the duty desk in the corner, where the official logbook lay closed. He approached it with dread, knowing that whatever secrets the lighthouse held were likely trapped inside those pages. Mor sat at the desk and opened the logbook. The entries for December were routine, until the 12th. That was when the tone changed strictly. Thomas Marshall, the second assistant, wrote, "Severe gale, north by northwest. Sea lashed to fury. Never seen such a storm." He also added a detail that made no sense. "Principal keeper James Ducat is very quiet." Later that same day, he wrote, "Marshall crying." Mor paused. He knew these men. Ducat and Marshall were seasoned veterans of the sea. They had survived hurricanes without blinking. Why would a storm make them cry? Why would they be terrified? But the mystery deepened. Mor checked the official weather reports from the nearby island of Lewis for those specific dates. The report was clear. On December 12th, 13th, and 14th, the weather was calm. There was no storm. Yet the logbook continued its descent into madness. On December 13th, the writing was shaky. Storm continued through night. Wind shifting west by north. Gray daylight. Me, Ducat, and MacArthur prayed. 3 tough Scottish sailors huddled in the dark, praying for mercy from a storm that physically did not exist. The final entry was dated December 15th at 1 p.m. It was short, chilling, and final. Storm ended. Sea calm. God is over all. After that, simply silence. While the logbook suggested a descent into madness inside the tower, the physical evidence outside told a story of brutal violence. Investigator Robert Muirhead went down to the West Landing, the most dangerous side of the island. What he found there defied physics. Iron railings, cemented deep into the rock, were twisted like wire. A concrete block weighing more than a ton had been ripped from its foundation and thrown 40 feet up the cliff. Supply boxes stored 110 feet above sea level had been smashed to splinters. The conclusion was terrifying. A wave. A single, monstrous wall of water must have climbed the cliffs, striking with the force of a bomb. This led to the official theory. On December 15th, the men went out to secure the gear during a storm and were swept away by a rogue wave. It is a logical explanation, but it leaves haunting questions. If they were washed away, why was the gate closed? Why was one set of oilskins left inside? And most disturbingly, if they died on the 15th, who wrote the final entry about God being over all? The locals of the Outer Hebrides never accepted the wave theory. They whispered of the 7 hunters, spirits that guarded the rock, or something ancient rising from the dark depths of the Atlantic. To this day, the sea has never returned their bodies. The Flannan Isles Lighthouse still operates today, completely automated. No keepers walk those halls anymore. The silence has returned to the rock. Perhaps that is for the best. Some places are simply not meant for human life. So, what really happened on that rock? Was it a freak wave that swallowed 3 experienced men in an instant? Or did the isolation eventually drive them to see things that weren't there? I leave the final verdict to you. Whichever you believe, the sea keeps its secrets. Until we meet again in the dark, stay safe.